All right, well, hopefully you found that adorable because all babies do it. It's really a fun thing to see that very consistently you can see their awareness of how the world works developing right before your eyes if you know the right little tests to administer to them. If you have access to an infant and you want to test them out, the A not B error usually emerges somewhere between 8 and 10 months of age, so that's a really good time to grab that. If you have a younger baby, you can do just the regular hide it underneath one towel and see if they'll look for it. If you have an older baby, you might want to escalate from a ball and towels to, let's say, mom inside of one of two closets that are right next to each other, something like that. That's kind of a fun one to escalate with an older baby. Anyway, let's talk about getting ready to talk. So, babies can't talk and that unless certain maturational changes have occurred to their vocal tracts. So here's a picture of a gorilla on the left and a human on the right. I am not calling babies gorillas. I'm saying that babies have vocal tracts that look much more like a gorilla's vocal tract than it does an adult human's. And part of that is because their necks are shorter relative to the size of their head. Their tongues are way bigger compared to their mouths than will happen in an adult human. So there are just a lot of structural things that actually have to change in a baby to make them actually able to make the speech sounds that we expect them to make intelligible language. So part of it is physical structures. Part of it is motor control of their physical structures. So when we talk about motor control, we're talking about a portion of the brain called the motor cortex. And what you can see in this picture here, they've drawn different parts of the body bigger if there are more neurons devoted to controlling that part of the body, and they've drawn it smaller if there are fewer. Notice how big the lips, the jaw, the tongue, they're drawn really large because there are a lot of neurons devoted to processing or controlling those parts of the body. Until you've kind of wired up that part of the motor cortex, you're not going to have control over those parts of the body. So as those parts of the body are maturing and getting ready to be used in a linguistic way, the motor cortex is wiring up to be able to control those parts of the body. And then finally, there's the language cortex that needs to develop. We've talked about the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area previously, so here's a nice picture of the brain. Wernicke's area being the pink area and Broca's area being the purple area. Wernicke's area develops first, and it's the part of the brain that processes incoming language. And so babies usually are non-responsive for a really long time. Like they can't produce like linguistic responses, made up of words and stuff like that, until their Broca's area has matured. But they're able to respond. You can say things to them, and it's clear that they understand the words that you're saying. And that's because Wernicke's area develops a little bit earlier. So until both of these are in place and both of them are wired up, at least to a certain extent, you're not going to see the baby uttering actual words, right? Like that's going to take a little bit of maturation. All right, so speech perception and production. Perceiving speech, so like I said, receptive speech, it's going to come first, and it's going to take a little bit of time. A newborn to maybe 2-month-old baby may not really understand much of what's being said, but they're understanding a lot of the intonation. So here in the U.S. or in English language in general, questions go up. So if are you having fun? Do you want to go again? Who's that? Is that daddy? Right? Like these kinds of things that we say, they tend to rise. Other languages have a drop in the questioning, and I can't speak those languages, so I can't imitate it very well. But French is one of them where they actually have a drop off for a question. So babies become attuned to that during this period of time, and they're learning what the cadence and the intonation, and if a question's being asked, they pay attention more. It's like they're primed to be little interview subjects, where you'll ask them a series of questions and someday they'll be able to answer them. So they are paying attention, and they need that kind of give and take in language in order for the rest of the language development to occur. So between birth and about 8 weeks of age, you'll hear a lot of what we call reflexive and vegetative sounds. That sounds really attractive, but this is going to be burps and coughs and sneezes and gurgles and little chirps and other things that they're doing that have absolutely nothing to do with language. So really commonly for the first, 8 weeks of life, you'll hear a lot of noises coming out of the baby's mouth, but they aren't necessarily tied to any kind of attempt to gain language. They're just sort of making noises. Between 8 and 20 weeks, you'll start to hear a lot more cooing and a lot more laughter coming out of babies. I found this little video, and I'm going to try something here and see if I can play this video in a way that you can hear it without having to hop to the playlist. So we're going to try this out. I'm going to mute myself and then play that video.
What is it, Boo-Boo? Look at that cute little nose. Look at that cute little nose. Look at that cute little nose. You're such a cutie.
The biggest thing that you'll notice in that video is the eye contact that the infant is having with its mom and the responsiveness. The mom says something and then she, baby feels like it's appropriate for the baby to try and fill in that gap. And so it goes, ooh, right? There, you saw some smiles in there too. That's really common with babies who are cooing. You'll see smiles and you'll hear that a lot of times. The reason why it's called cooing is that you'll hear a lot of that ooh sound. So it got called cooing because that's such a common vowel sound that you'll hear in the noises that little babies make. So between 8 weeks, so that's about a 2-month-old baby, to about 20 weeks, that's about a 5-month-old baby, you'll hear a lot of these kinds of noises as they're interacting. And that's the important thing. They're interacting with someone else. They sometimes will lay in their crib and make those noises, kind of talking to themselves. But it's really important to have these kinds of give and take, like you just saw in this video, where the mom seems to be trying to have, a pseudo conversation with their baby, because babies learn the give and take of language by that. All right. Don't coo anymore, baby. Okay. Vocal play. Now you'll start to notice that there's overlaps of the age bracket because babies do have different sort of patterns of, not patterns, timing of the developmental stages. So some babies will start to move into vocal play while others are still, doing a lot of cooing and laughter. Cooing and laughter will also be occurring even as the child's moving on to the vocal play phase, which typically will start to emerge around 16 weeks and carry on until they're about 30 weeks of age. So a reasonably long period of time that they'll be doing the vocal play. Vocal play, I thought I had a video, sorry. Vocal play is where they are making a lot of different speech sounds that could be part of a language that they don't even know, or that they're not even being exposed to. So babies during this vocal play phase, if you're in an English speaking household, you might not think that it's practicing for language, but you might hear your baby go and you're like, well, that's an interesting noise. It's maybe I would put it into the reflexive and vegetative sounds, but it's not. In other languages, that's actually a speech sound. Or you might hear your baby going prrr, prrr, and you might think as an English speaker, well, that's nothing. But if you were in another language, that actually is a speech sound. Or so a lot of the vocal play that you'll hear you'll think just noises that are actually speech sounds if the baby was going to be exposed to another language. You will also be hearing them practice the things that they're going to be saying in the language that they're being exposed to. So you'll hear a lot of ba, 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 ba. My friend just sent me a video of her brilliant granddaughter who, was born September, October, November, December, January. So the baby's 5 months old, smack in the middle of the vocal play period. And so the baby went, ma, and then you hear the mom go, that's right, mama. And it's like, yeah, I didn't say mama. I made a vocal play sound that has an M and an A, and you heard mama. But because of that kind of reinforcement that babies get, that baby's going to say ma more often than it would if it was just an ignored sound. And so ultimately it's going to help diffuse into the next stage where they'll start to, do more purposeful speech. But right now they're just playing, and it's just exploring how their vocal tract works. And part of the ability of the vocal tract to mature is dependent on it being used. And so that's why babies are playing with it. Even deaf babies go through these stages of language production, even though they can't hear themselves. Ultimately, they will stop making these verbal sounds when they can't hear themselves, but they go through the stages. They will produce the sounds, which is kind of surprising to a lot of people. Now, the next stage is called reduplicated babbling, and this is going to last almost to the end of the first year. And this is, it's called reduplicated because the babbling keeps repeating itself. So you may have a baby who says mama, but they actually go mama, 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 mama. They aren't saying mama, right? They're just making a series of vowel consonant sounds that roll off their tongue very easily. Da 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 da. So a lot of times people think it's weird that babies always say very similar things. Like, why is it always mama? Why is it always dada? Well, it's because vowel consonant is easy to pronounce, right? So there are actually other ones that they'll say. They'll be like do, 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 do. But because that doesn't mean anything, we don't really encourage the do, 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 do. We don't go, oh yeah, do, do, do. That's right, dodo. Like, what is that? But when they go dada, we go, that's right, dada. So they're like da 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 da. Oh, did you say dada? And we encourage that, and that'll help them to move on into actually recognizing what things they're uttering really are, recognizable speech sounds, and what things are being ignored by the environment, so they must not be meaningful. So here we have, I'm going to try this again. So if this doesn't work, I'll have to record this whole video over again, but we're going to try, and let's see if Emily babbling works in this context. So let's check it out. Perfect, Emily. Did you hear her just say repeated things that didn't really mean anything? That's reduplicated babbling. And she's just practicing. She's just making some sounds. She might even kind of think she's saying something, but she's not. Non-reduplicated babbling is when they will start to actually say something. So now they will say some things that might be really more jargon, but their family members might know what that jargon means. Like my grandson, he's in this phase of, well, he's just starting to leave this 9 to 18 month period. But he calls his dog Bailey. He calls her Bay. No L in it, just Bay. And we all know that that's the dog, right? And he has a lot of those kinds of little jargon terms that if you see what he's referring to and you know the context, it's kind of easy to figure out what he's trying to say. And he does a lot of non-reduplicated babbling where he will say mama. Like mama is officially a word, right? Like we've all adopted it. But I have a feeling that part of the reason why mama and dada are okay names to call your parents is because they are reduplicated babbles that you can truncate down to a non-reduplicated babble and have a word. And a lot of babies will call their moms mama and their dads dada. And then by the time they get better at language, they're calling them mommy and daddy or mom and dad, or right. And it gets more and more honed. So non-reduplicated babbling is where they've honed some of these reduplicated babbles into what are actual words or jargon words. Now, during this period of time, a lot of times babies will babble in such a way that it sounds like they're saying something, but really what they're uttering is a bunch of just nonsense. And I can't even begin to imitate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this baby who's doing it. So I'll start it and then I will, well, let's see. I'm going to make sure I don't blow out.
Jojo. Ne seyrediyoruz? Jojo. Açsana ben Jojo'yu açayım. Baby TV mi? Jojo mu? Jetix mi? Hangisini açayım söyle. Evet, Baby TV'yi açıyorum bize göre. Jojo'yu açıyorum. Jojo.
I'm impressed that lady can imitate it because it's really hard to say nonsensical things. And so imitating a non-reduplicated babbler who's using a bunch of jargon or just complete nonsense is actually kind of hard to imitate. But you can kind of see babies moving through these stages in order, There can be some overlap. Like I said, you may still be experiencing cooing as you're starting vocal play, some vocal play while you're doing reduplicated babbling. Like these things overlap each other. But ultimately, what you end up with at the end of 2 years is a baby who can string together some words, which is pretty impressive. I'd like to see any of us spend 2 years studying a language and come out as competent as a 2-year-old is in their first language. So let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the social precursors to language that are really important.